Good morning. So in the spirit of the continuation of the themes I've been addressing in this year in the last weeks, for sure, and months even. So it seems fitting, since we're coming from Tisha B'Av, the 9 days and 3 weeks, to talk about the next step, which is Chamisha Asher B'Av through the lens of Chassidus. So Chamisha Asher B'Av is one of these Yom Tovim that are pretty obscure and unknown, and most people probably wouldn't know about it in our time if the Rebbe didn't speak about it. Even though it's a Mishnah and a Gemara and Tainus, however, hasn't really been celebrated. And especially the somewhat puzzling Maimar Chazal, Lo Yom Tovim L'Yisrael Ki Chamisha Asher B'Av V'Kiyim HaKippurim, which seems odd to compare these two. Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, Achaz Bashana, Mamash and Teresh B'Ksav, Shabbos Shabbosin, the highest level, literally the highest level possible, and side by side with Chamisha Asher B'Av. So the Gemara gives its reasons of the different events that happen in Chamisha Asher B'Av, and the Rebbe explains they're all connected to Achdus. But what's missing really is, those are all events that happen at Chamisha Asher B'Av. But number one, Megalgun Schus L'Yem Zakai, something happens in a certain days because there's something special about that day. All those events could have been on a different day of the year, even though some are connected to that Kufa, like Yom Taber Magel, which we'll talk about, and some of the others are connected to the period when the nights start getting longer. However, most of the others, whether it's about the Shvatim or the other things that happen in Tu B'Av, the end of the Gzeda and the Midbar, could have happened any other day. So the question still remains, what's so powerful about this day, per se? So the Arizal asks this question and elaborates, and I'm looking right now at the Maimer Nachmu, Shabbos Nachmu and Parsha Nachmu in Eter, Tafrei Shayim, which is often cited when it comes to this discussion. It's one of the few Maimorim that talk about Chamisha Asher B'Av. Is based on a Maimer from the Tzemach Tzedek, which is most likely based on a Maimer from the Alter Rebbe. And he brings that in Priyetz Chaim that the reason is because Ozu Mili HaLevana B'Shleimus. The 15th of Av is the complete moon, full moon, Kaim Esira B'Shlemusa. But Tzarech Lahavin Alei B'Chol Tezvav L'Chedesh Hu Mili HaLevana. V'Lama Le'Mitzinu Shiyah Oz Yom Tov Levad MePesach V'Sukkah Shu B'Tezvav. Every month is the 15th, and every month therefore is a full moon. And you only find that Pesach and the Sukkot, and some places the Rebbe adds also Purim, Yudal and Tezvav. Okay, but Purim you could say is Midrabanon, Divrei Sofrim. But the bottom line is, you don't find it being a Yontif. And the answer he says, and furthermore, it's even greater, it says, than Pesach and Shavuos, and Sukkot, because it doesn't say Yom Tovim L'Yisrael, Pesach and Sukkot, it's Tavke Chamisha Asher B'Av. So the ultimate answer is because the Shleimus HaLevana of Chamisha Asher B'Av comes after what he calls the Yerida Atzuma. I'm trying to look for the exact Lashon. The Yerida Atzuma of Tisha B'Av. So in other words, it's not just another full moon, it's a full moon that comes after a tremendous Helen V'Hester. So for this we need to understand exactly what is the moon in general, because again the moon is just symbolic. A full moon, what was the significance of a full moon? Especially we know that the moon is always full. It's only the angle as it shines to the earth that makes it full. The moon always has a full moon. If you go out into space, you could always see a full moon. It's only the angles that make the difference, which seemingly seems very chesed because it's only just a matter of perspective. Obviously if you're inside your house and you don't look out the window, you're not going to see a moon altogether. So the Rebbe explains, because it says the whole purpose of the moon is l'hoyer ala oretz. That's what it says in the Pasuk in Bereshis. So it's not the moon itself shining, that's not the goal. Like Abish didn't create the moon that it should shine. It should illuminate the earth. So al pi Torah, the Metzias Levana, its value is only connected to how it affects the earth. So the angle that shines, whether it's a new moon, or it's a first quarter, or the full moon, or the second or the third quarter, are relevant and critical to halacha. Obviously, the Chassidus and Yom Tovim are designated by that. But above all, its effect on the human being on the earth. And in the context of that, even scientifically, we know that a full moon is not just a technical thing, it actually affects the earth. The tides, which is so much part of sea travel and so on, are all affected by the moon's cycles. A full moon, the tide is going to be the high tide. A new moon will be a low tide, because the moon's, even though the moon remains more or less the same distance from the earth, but when there's more light, when the light of the moon is shining on the earth, it causes more gravitational pull, which in turn affects the tides. So bottom line is that therefore we measure it not just by the fact that the moon is full all the time, but how it affects the earth. But getting back to the very topic, but what then is the significance of all of this? And the truth is, al pi nigla, as I said in the Gemara, you could talk, there's the different reasons given for Chamish Asar B'Av, but we still need to know what's the core reason. What's the core issue here? So clearly it's definitely connected to Tisha B'Av. But then we have to get into what exactly is the tragedy of Tisha B'Av. So here, just briefly summing up what it says in this Maimer and other places, is that it's all around what we call in Lashon of Kabbalah, and is that all about the Aliyah and Yerida of Malchus. So Malchus is the 10th of the last of the 10 spheres. And we know Malchus is that paradox that on one hand we say Lesla Megamoklum, it has nothing of its own, the Zohar says. And yet, because of that, because of its so-called emptiness and bittul, it channels all the spheres. So you can't, the language of Kabbalah and Chassidus again, Malchus is the Sherish and the Mokir of Biyah. So Malchus of Atzilus is the bridge between all the faculties and attributes of Chachma all the way through all the Esser spheres that channel through Malchus into Biyah. What this means in simple Chassidus Chabad language is that you can have all your faculties in place, but if you don't have Malchus, it won't be expressed. It won't achieve anything. A person can have Chabad and Chagas and Nehi, but Malchus is ultimately the relationship with the other. So even though the Midas is already Chesed, Gvur is all about a relationship, Midas, Ha'adam, but the actualization of it is all through Malchus. So to put it in maybe more psychological terms, if you wish, Malchus is translated sometimes as dignity. Malchuskeit, that a person feels like a king or a queen. A person could be smart, Chabad, they could be a Baal Midas, emotionally intelligent, emotionally developed, but if you don't have dignity, what we call sometimes self-confidence or self-esteem, what happens? All those faculties, as powerful as they are lacking the most important thing of all, self-esteem. I'm sure you've met people in your lifetime that have many milas, but they don't have self-confidence. And what usually is the effect? It affects everything about them. Even though l'cheira self-confidence is just a seemingly external thing. If a person is intelligent and they have the other faculties at work, but there's something about sensing self that you need to have that. So in the language of Chassidus, that is, the Alter Rebbe uses the expression rememus. Remus or hisnasus, it's the midas hisnasus, the midas ha-rememus. The Rebbe sometimes uses the expression from the Gemara that Kol Yisrael b'nei melachim heim, or melachim heim, which means it's a sense of feeling special and unique. I mean, I'm just using psychological language to explain it, but the fact is sometimes to appreciate something you have to understand that when you're lacking it. When a person, for example, you see in one of the big challenges that people have is grow up in a home, a dysfunctional home, or even worse, Rahman al-Islam, a person is separated from their parents at a young age, and or the parents abandon the child, what is the real effect and the damage done on the psyche of a child? It's essentially their malchus is damaged mostly. When I say damaged, I don't mean in an impermanent way, but in a very challenging way, because you don't feel the love and the validation that a child needs. All of us need it, but especially in young age, one of the most important things, you look at children, they're always looking for validation. You know, when they do something nice and a parent smiles and gives them a compliment, you can't imagine how far that goes. That helps shape that confidence, because children have nowhere else to look at except adults around them. And that approval, or God forbid disapproval, has a deep impact. Parents who are very critical, for example, or adults or educators that are very critical, has a very strong effect on children. Not that you can have constructive criticism, you know, it's gvura shebechesed, but if it's too much gvura and too much negativity, it's a very toxic effect. And a lot of the healing that people need as they get older is around that. How much validation, how much confidence and a self-esteem was built, especially in their formative years. So in the language of Chassidus, that's Malchus. Malchus is not a sfira as a koyach, a faculty like Chochmah, Bina, or Chesed, Gvura, but is the faculty of dignity, of specialness, of a value. A Malchus Dekait. You feel special, you feel like a king and a queen. And we're not talking here about, God forbid, arrogance or yeshus. We're talking about knowing that the Eibishter created, when the Mishnah says in Sanhedrin, that while lefikach nivra adam yechidi, why was a person created an individual, not as a group, not part of a herd like animals and others, and other creations like tzemeach or daimim, an individual, because chayev adam leimer b'shvili nivra elam. So it's not an arrogant thing, b'shvili nivra elam, like I'm the center of the universe, but the responsibility, like we see clearly in that Mishnah, it continues and says, why was that person created last? If the human being is such a special creation, and is the whole purpose of Bria, is that the human being should come and make a dira b'tachtein in the language of Chassidus. So why was the human being created last? Should have been created first. So the Mishnah says two answers. One is because it's like the guest. Nichnas, you don't first bring the guest to the table and then set the table. First you make a Shulchan Aruch, you set the table, then you bring the guest. The second answer that's given is that I feel that when a person sins, he should know even a small insect, a mosquito, a yitush, a fly, a small insect preceded you. So don't think you're so special. So the it seems like a contradiction. Are you the special guest, or are we even less than a yitush? So the answer, of course, is obvious. Also, in Tanya, he says it in different words. It depends how you behave. If you behave the way the Eibishter created you, b'tselem Elokim, and live up to your purpose, so absolutely, you're the most special. You're the melech or the malchal b'shvili nivrei elo. However, if you behave in a way that defies or transgresses, so you should know even a yitush precedes you, meaning even a small insect does not ever defy God. Because the loy meshana tafkidam, the language of Tanya. Animals, and for that matter, David Sameach, all follow the clockwork of the program that Hashem created. It's only a human being that has the ability to waver and to change the script, so to speak. That's why Chassidus' expression that when a Rasha, a person that walks on the street, the cobblestones cry out, Petach, what right do you have to walk on me? I was never Evan Arotzin Hashem, and you're walking on me? Stones cry out, like we say, Me'evan Mekir Tizak, because that's the story. So what do you see from this? That the concept of being like a melech, a malko, is exactly right. What happens on Rosh Hashanah? First Rosh Hashanah is the day Adam Achava created. So they said, Boiv v'nechrov v'nishtachva l'fnei Hashem Elokeinu. They brought the whole world to recognize the Eibishter and to stand and crown the Eibishter as melech. But that itself is because the Eden themselves, or the Eden, then it was not an Id, but it was Adam and Chava, have that Malchus Dekait of Tzelem Elokim that have the power to crown, to machtir the Eibishter as a melech. Like Chassidus says, talking about insects, it says in Chassidus the Lashon, melech chal azvuvim, you don't have a king, he's not a king over flies, over insects, over flies. The king has to be a king, over nifrodim, not children and not family, but has to be someone that's sambat be'erech. To say I crown myself as king over the flies of the world or over the ants is not shaykh because there's nothing berech b'neim. So there has to be something berech. So going back to Malchus, therefore, Malchus is a critical piece in the whole picture. And that's why it says in Kabbalah Chassidus that the Beis HaMikdash and Yerushalayim are all connected to Malchus. Because V'shachanti b'seichem, also the Mikdash, V'shachanti b'seichem is exactly that. Is the channeling of the Shekhinah, of a Lakus down in this world, b'seichem. That is what Malchus is. Malchus is Shekhinah. That's why we always compare Malchus to the Shekhinah. So the Amshach is Kutshabricha v'Shchinte, Zoh and Malchus. So this, bring the Shekhinah down below, that's Malchus. Like even we learn it in the Maimer, Basel Legani from the Medrash. So what does it say? Beginning of the creation, Basel Legani, Yachesikala, like the Gani like Sivkan, the Gan like Sivkan, the Gani Legnuni, like my bridal chamber. Why? Because Be'ika Shechina B'tachtenim Hoysa. And then, through the Chet Tzadas and the subsequent Averis, what happened? The Shechina went up to the Kiyah Adishon, then the Kiyah Sheni, the Kiyah Shlishi. Malchus is when it's down below. Malchus Yeredes Lamata, and it's Mamshech the Shechina down below. But when the Shechina is Eila Lamayla, means Hela Mashchina. And then Avram Avinu, after 7 generations, began the process. The next side, the 7 generations from Avram to Moshe, V'shachanti b'seichem. Deir HaShvi is Moshe. And the Deir HaShvi of our time. What's Shvi? Malchus again. Chesed is the first of the 7 midas. The Shvi is the 7th, is the Rebbe. In our time and Moshe in his time. So that is the concept of Malchus. Herodes HaShechina Lamata. So when you talk about the Beis HaMikdash on earth, that's when Malchus is Nimshach Lamata, and the Shechina v'shachanti b'seichem. However, due to the Mipnei Chateinu, whether it was the Chatoim from the Bayis Rishon, but especially in Bayis Sheni, Sinas Chinam, primarily, which is what? We know that without the Achdus of Barchenu Avinu, without Kolonu Ke'echad, Barchenu Avinu is limited. Like the Moshel the Frierdiker Rebbe brings of a father that he cannot come to a table of his children when they're fighting with each other. It's not the place where he wants to be. So what happens is, how could the Eibush to have a Shechanti B'Seichem when his family, when his own children are not getting along with each other? So therefore, what was affected most, it wasn't Chachmeh, it wasn't Bina, it wasn't the Svidus Alienis, it was Malchus. And that's the Lashon Pagam HaMalchus. I just want to see the exact Lashon. It's a very strong language here. If I find it good, if not, I'll leave it for later. But he says that the Yerida Malchus was a Pagam in Malchus. Pagam is a very strong word. Pagam means an injury. It's like a wound. And you don't say Pagam in the higher spheres, you say the other spheres are nostalgic. But where's the Pagam in Malchus? Because that's what affects most. The Shechina Ba'aretz. Can move in the Eberster is not at the higher levels is not affected by Golus. Shechinta Begalusa. It's not the Shechina. But that does have a profound effect. And that's why Tisha B'Av is 9th day in the month. You see right away, what's 9? So we know the Sefer Yetzirah says, Eser v'lei Tesha, Eser v'lei Achadosa. It's Dafke Eser Sfiris. It's not 9, it's not 11. Not 9 as in missing Malchus. So Tisha B'Av can have all the milas, but what's lacking is the most important one. Amshachus Hashchina, Yeridus Hashchina Lamata. And that's the day when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. So it's not just some Punkt, the 9th of Av. It's Tafkid Dem number 9. So that is essentially what we call Yerida Atzuma, tremendous effect in Malchus. And I explained both in Ruchnius, is talking about the Shechina Lamata, and psychologically and emotionally, it's essentially an element. What is Golus? He says in Sefer Achinu, Golus in some ways is worse than Misa. Because Golus is displacement. You know, the Rebbe speaks with Tzar Gadol about his father when he was sent off in Golus. You hear, he always quotes, see the Golus. He couldn't have his Svardim, he couldn't have his community. That's one of the worst Golus is they send you to a place where there's nobody there. Anyone goes to Almaty, you could see that. So Golus has an element, if you're talking about affecting someone's dignity, that's the first thing, you take them out of their own element. You take a person like Rav Levi Yitzchak or any God or any tzaddik, and you put him in a place which is among people who not just don't appreciate, but laugh at, are completely, it's the ultimate humiliation and the ultimate bizayon for a neshama, like he says in Chassidus, that the Rachman is the neshama when you see the neshama comes down below and has to hang out in a world like this. If you think of chelik elekam mal mamish, and the Yorda Plois comes down to a world that is so the opposite, like Vayetze Yaakov, Vayelech Charona, Charei Nafshal Mokim, a place that's not just a Helen Vehester, Cheshach Chofel Mechupel, Mole Klippes V'Sita Achre, Reshaim Gevrim Bey. And you just think of, even on a very Balbatisha level, think of the Frierdiker Rebbe sitting with those Rishayim and how they tortured him, a Rebbe. Same thing with the Alter Rebbe, and again, same thing with Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. I mean, just it's besides the injustice of it, the humiliation. You're talking here, Am Nivcher. You're talking about a nation that is the Eibishter, B'nai B'chei Yisrael, Mamleches Kainim, talking about Malchus, Mamleches Kainim V'gei Kodesh, is the ultimate Pegiyah, and the ultimate wound and injury in Malchus is when the Chil Hashem, when a Eid is hurt by, especially by Tzeder Yisrael, by a Rosh Merusha. So that very concept is itself the ultimate, you can say, destruction of Malchus. And therefore that's where the biggest challenge is, and also that's where the biggest Aveda is. Basically, that's why you find the language so often in Chassidus from Kabbalah, again, Binyan HaMalchus. Binyan HaMalchus. You don't hear about Binyan HaChochmeh or Binyan HaChesed, even though they too need all the Sfiris and so on. But it's Binyan HaMalchus, especially in the Aseret Yemei Tshuva. It's Binyan HaMalchus, starting Rosh Hashanah. Every one of the 10 days of Tshuva is building up Malchus until Yom Kippur, which is the ultimate. And you talk about the Aliyah of Malchus to Keser, Keser Malchus. That Malchus V'Eishes Chayla Teres Baila. I'm just using language that you see always in the Mamorim. They're not just Stam. It's because everything plays out in Malchus. The worst challenges are Malchus, and also the greatest Aliyahs in Malchus. So in that context, then you can understand, so the Malchus in the month of Av is not like the Malchus of any other month. Precisely because the Yerida was such a profound one. The Churban Beis Hamikdash and all the other. So therefore, when it comes now, the Yerida Tzedek Aliyah, the whole purpose, like he says in Yalkut Shmeini, of Yovei Aryeh, that Nebuchadnezzar called the lion, came and destroyed the lion, the Beis Hamikdash, in the month of Aryeh, which is the Mazel of Av. Almanas, as the Rebbe emphasizes time and again, this Medrash, the whole thing is like Seis Almanas Livnes, Almanas, that Sheyove Aryeh, the Eibishter, Aryeh Shog Mila Yira, should come and rebuild the Aryeh, the Beis Hamikdash, in the month of Aryeh in Av. So you see clearly that the Yerida and Aliyah are directly linked. So then when you think of it that way, anything that happens now in the repair and Tikkun HaMalchus and Binyan HaMalchus after Tisha B'Av is direct commensurate, proportionate to the Yerida. The deeper the Yerida, the greater the Aliyah. And that's how that Arizal explains. I mean, he does all this explanation is not in the words of that Arizal, the words of this is the Chassidus, but it lies in the Arizal's words that's why Chamisha Sabav Lo Yom Tevim L'Yisrael Ki Chamisha B'Av. And we'll get to Yom Kippur in a minute. Because Chamisha Sabav is the full moon after the destroyed moon, if you wish, the destroyed Beis Hamikdash. So, like the Gemara Taka says, what happened on Chamisha Sabav? It says that the Eden every year would be in the Midbar. They would dig graves because they knew the Gzeira, and that year the Gzeira stopped. When did it stop? On Chamisha Sabav. So you see clearly that on that day is a tikkun happened. The tikkun of Malchus, the Binyan HaMalchus, and therefore the full moon of Chamisha Sabav is not like the full moon even of Pesach or Sukkot or Purim or B'chlal of all the other months, because it comes specifically, because you could think after Tisha B'Av, maybe, God forbid, it's all over. As the Yidden thought every year that the Gzeira is not going to end. And then comes Chamisha Sabav, and you see that even after all that's happened to us, that the moon becomes full. After such a moment, that's unbelievable. Even on a personal level. I remember once I was in London. I gave a talk there, and it was in one of the shuls, Rabbi Sachs' shul, the former chief rabbi, Olav Shalom. And so I gave the drasha. He asked me to speak by after Kriyas Torah. So I spoke about, there were a few Holocaust survivors there, so I thought I addressed some of what they went through. But I brought the Gemara in Avodah Zarah that says that the first Shabbos, so we know Od Machava after the Chet Eitzadas, it was Friday, according to the Gemara, and that Friday night was the sun did not set. Lamed Vav Shai Shimsha Esa Era. The first sunset on earth after Adam and Chava were created was on Motzei Shabbos. So basically, Friday night was a bright night. Came Motzei Shabbos, as the sun started setting, the Gemara says that Adam and Chava became very disturbed because they never saw darkness before. Remember, they were created B'yei Mashishi, and it was never dark Friday night. So the first darkness was Motzei Shabbos. So they thought, the Gemara says, that they destroyed the world. Suddenly you see a light, the night coming, and the sun going down, and it becomes dark. So they thought that was it, that the world is being destroyed. So they couldn't go to sleep. So they were up all night doing tshuva, doing mispal, that over the chet that they had done. In the morning, as the sun began to rise, they realized, the Gemara says, Elam kimin hageneg. They thought that they had destroyed the world. No, the Gemara says, Elam kimin hageneg. That's part of the Seder the Eibishter created, that there's Vayiyad and Vayibeker, that there's night and there's day. So they were somewhat relieved. So when you learn the Gemara B'Pashtus, it sounds that a good thing or a bad thing, the Elam kimin hageneg. On one hand, it's a good thing. You see, they didn't destroy the world. On the other hand, that is say the tshuva they had. They felt that they are affecting the world. They felt, you know what? The world goes on even if we don't do tshuva, or the world goes on even though we did a chet. So you can learn the Gemara in both ways. Now, so I shared this and I said, so what we learn from this is two things. That when there's darkness in our lives, on one hand that should be made us to do something about it, whether it's tshuva or other things, like with Masechtas Tainus talks about, as the nights get longer, you have to add in Limud HaTorah, Le'ivra Laila El Legirsa. But on the other hand, we have to also know that even when something dark happens, the sun will rise. And there's always hope. There's always a new day, so to speak. I told the story, my father was in Chassidus by the Rebbe, Tavshin Lamed Aleph, after he came back from Russia, which was very tough times then in Russia for the Yidden. It was a long, long Yechidus that went all the way till the morning. Mamish till dawn broke. The Yechidus ended, it started 11 p.m., it ended 6 a.m. approximately. And when the Yechidus ended, the Rebbe stood up. The light was already starting to shine through the window. You could see the dawn breaking. The Rebbe stood up. My father told me that the Rebbe was like fresh, like as if the whole night never passed. And the Rebbe said, Anaya Tog. That was the Rebbe's words. Anaya Tog. It's a certain expression, especially they were talking about a lot of challenging things, the dark matzav for Eden in Russia, other challenges. So it was like a feeling that Rebbe said, listen, a new day has come, new challenges, new opportunities. So after I finished my talk in London, a fellow stood up and asked if he could say something. And he told his own story. He said he was a child during the war, and he was in one of the camps, 2 camps actually, because my whole family was wiped out. My parents, my brothers and sisters, my grandparents, uncles, everybody. I was the only one left. And you can't imagine, after the war, I didn't want to be alive. For me, it wasn't worthwhile living. After everything that happened, I felt guilty. I mean, all the different feelings that someone in that situation. And he says, I have to share this. He says, I remember when we were in Dachau, where he said, so we would sleep at night. We were so exhausted from the day and from the tzaddis. So we would sleep in the bunkers. And we slept on these wooden, very hard, whatever you call them, and very painful. Sometimes I'd fall asleep simply out of exhaustion, and I sometimes forgot where I was. And I remember a few times I would be woken up by the sun shining through the window in the bunker. And talking about in the concentration camp. And for that split second, I saw the sun shining, I felt, hey, I forgot where I was. So I didn't realize until I kapzich. So I became, he says, fixated, that was his word, on the sun and on the nature. I began to really get angry, not just at Hashem, but also at very nature. How could the sun rise in the morning and not protest? Hazino Hashemayim v'sishma ha'aretz imirfi. Moshe made the sun and the moon, the heaven and the sky and the earth, Edim, witnesses that they would protect us. How could the sun not protest? One morning the sun should at least say to Hashem, I'm not going to rise until you stop this stop this genocide. And I started getting angry at the grass and at the blue sky and the mountains. You saw the Bavarian mountains out the window, which usually would be a beautiful sight. But here I'm seeing it through the hell of Auschwitz, of Dachau. And I became angrier and angrier that the world is just completely silent. That was the way he put it. So when I finally was liberated, and I was so angry and upset and basically didn't even want to be alive, I was angry at the world itself, not just at Hashem, at the whole world, that it never did anything to protest. I'm not giving you all the dramatics of how he said it. It was very, very emotional. But this is the gist of it. And he said, for years, I just cannot get over it. I literally cannot function. Day after day was mamish impossible. And I really wanted, I said, every morning I was hoping, praying to Hashem. Everyone says, Moida'ani. I was praying that Hashem should not be Hirzate b'nishmasi. That's what he said. Upon him, a few years passed, he said. Then he ended up in London. I don't remember if he told us how, but he ended up there. Maybe he had other family, I'm not sure. He says, and again, every day, every night was the same nightmare for me. Until one morning I woke up and I suddenly saw the sun shining through the window. Same sun, the same sun that shined when I was in the concentration camp. And for some reason, the sun gave me this hope, this renewed hope that I can rebuild my life. And I realized that the same nature that on one hand had betrayed me also now became my savior. So he says, when you share the Gemara from Avodah Zarah about Elim Kiminogin, that's what I felt. On one hand, yes, they felt they destroyed the world because there came night. And then the Gemara says, Elim Kiminogin, but it also can give tremendous hope. This is the story he shared. I'll never forget it because it was so powerful. So I'm sharing it with you just as a context of what we're talking about here. So to bring it back to the theme of Chamisha above and make it real, it's one thing to talk about Haskaladik and Aveda, but also to bring it in reality. The fact of the matter is, Chamisha above in this context tells us it's like the day that gives us the most possible hope. Because it's one thing, a full moon in the month of Nisan, in the month of Tishrei, in the month of Adar, okay, very good. But one that comes after such a churban, there's no light that's greater like Yisra Ne'er Min HaCheshach than the one that comes through Cheshach. Like this story demonstrates that the sun was never the same for him, because it was the sun itself that both, on one hand, he felt betrayed by, but then felt empowered by. And it's in that context, you could also understand what's the connection to Yom Kippur. So the Mefarshim, the Rebbe has, I think, in Mem Zayin, maybe, Tosh Mem Zayin, one of the years the Rebbe asked the question, Bechlal, you read the Mishnah and the Gemara, it says, why was it the biggest Yom Tov? Because on that day, the Bnei Yerushalayim, the Bnei Yisrael, would go out. It was like basically Shidduch Day. That they went out and they would say to the Bochim, Sanoi Enecha, Yofes, Yofifiyes, Yemeyuchoses, and all the Lashen is there in the Mishnah. Which is like an odd thing. Melech Hamisha Sabah, fine. Seems like an appropriate day in the summer. But Yom Kippur, that's what they did. The Bnei Yisrael went out of Yom Kippur. So the Mefarshim talk about it. Like it's an odd thing. Where exactly do you have time on Yom Kippur to go out on a date? Or to, you ever think of it? Anyone goes on dates in Yom Kippur? It's like the only day in the year you don't go. So So the Mefarshim talk about that. But al Chassidus it's understood, because this is not about just Shidduchim. It's about the Yichud of Knesset Yisrael and Kudshe Brichu. Like the Rambam says, all of Shir HaShirim is about Shir HaShirim is a mashal, Ish v'Isha, for the Eibishter and the Eden. So we're talking before about Yichud Kudshe Brichu Shchinta, it's all about Malchus. Is the Aliyas HaMalchus and the Yichud of Malchus and Zoh, Mashpiyah Mekabel, Ma'oban, Yichud Shimsha V'Sira, in the language of Chassidus, sun of the moon, the full moon. That is what, so when is that the strongest? That is the strongest on Chamisha Asher B'Av. And also on Yom Kippur. And I think it's very obvious the connection in that sense. Why is Yom Kippur the holiest day of the year? Stam the Eibishter chose Achaz Bashan in the middle of the 10th day of Tishrei. Why not the 10th day of Chves, another day of the month? Another day, another month of the year. And the answer is because Yom Kippur is not the beginning of the story. Yom Kippur is the conclusion of a story that began with Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Yidden leave Egypt. 49 days they count. 50th day is Matan Torah. Moshe goes on the mountain for 40 days. Shavasa B'Tammuz, he comes down and he sees the Chet Egel. Shviras Haluchas. He goes back up another 40 days to pray for forgiveness. He's not Matzliach. He goes up another 40 days. And Yom Kippur is the final day when he comes back. Salachti Kidvarecha. So essentially Yom Kippur is 170 days from Pesach. Because 50 and 120. 3 times 40. The first 40 when Moshe was on Har Sinai. The next 40 and 40, 80. Until he gets his Matzliach. Salachti Kidvarecha, the Eibishter says. So Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year because it's a tikkun on the biggest Aveda possible. Aveda Zara, Mamish Yarek Val Yaver, Aveda Zara of Chet Egel. And Moshe was successful, Gimel Midas HaRachmim, to succeed in getting Tshuva. So if you think about it, it's exactly the same theme as Chamisha Sabav. It's the Aliyah after a tremendous Yerida. The same Yerida, actually. Chamisha Sabav is the beginning of the process. And Yom Kippur is the end of the process. So that's why you find that Shalah brings, the Tzemach Tzedek cites Shalah, that Aryeh, which is the mazel I mentioned before of, what's Rosh Hashanah of Aryeh? It says, Kadmenim, it says, is Rosh Hashanah, El, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Hishayin Rab. Aryeh is the month of Av. Av is the month of Churban. And yet, from that itself, just like we say, Geula Geula, the word Geula comes from the word Geula with the Aleph, from the actual Yerida of Aryeh, Almanas, Yovei Aryeh, that Almanas, that the Eibishter should rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. So what gives birth to El, which is a month of Tshuva, and Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur, and Yeshayin Rabbah, which is the Gemar HaChsima Teva, what the Gemar of Yom Kippur essentially, what gives birth to all of that? The very word Aryeh of. So therefore, it shouldn't be surprised that Chamisha Asher B'Av is connected to Yom Kippur in that sense, because what they capture is this tremendous aliyah after the Yerida. And that essentially is how Chassidus explains it. When you understand it, up Chassidus, the whole thing takes on a whole different shape. Then you look at this timing in the Gemara, then you understand why these reasons all happened. All these reasons are connected to Achdus, which is again the counterforce to the Sinas Chinam and the Pirud of between Malchus and Zoh, and the Pirud between Eden, the Chamachmon al-San that caused the Churban, and the other aspects as well, including the final points that the Gemara says about this is the day Yom Taber Magel, the day they broke the axe, because the summer begins to get, because the nights begin to get longer, so therefore the wood doesn't dry as much, and they wanted to have pure dry wood in the Beis HaMikdash. So therefore they broke the axe, they didn't cut any more wood after Chamisha Asher B'Av. So what do you do with this night? The extra night? So the Gemara says, it says that you Meisif, Chaim al Chaim, which is Teda, the you Meisif, and limit that Teda, because Lei Ivra Laila El gives the same idea. You're transforming Laila, which on one hand is a time when you're not cutting any more wood for the Beis HaMikdash. But on the other hand, you transform the Cheshach of Laila into a time where you learn more Torah. Again, this is taken from many of the Rebbe Sichos in the Siyumim and Masechta Tainis, and in the context of all these ideas. So you see here again from Primya Satera how it illuminates a day like Chamishas above, which turns it into a one Yom Tem Yisrael Chamishas above came a Kippurim. It says in Svarim that Rebbe brings the Chamishas above is Gematria Ksivich Simateva, I believe. So even though technically we start saying it at the beginning of El, but I think Chamishas above the Rebbe already began to allude to it or say it. So we should all have a Ksivich Simateva, all born from the Yehovchiyam Meil, the Sas and the Simcha, all the made in Teva. Enjoy your summer. The Rebbe doesn't like the word vacation because it means to vacate.